fibrous skeleton of heart and conducting system of heart. So first we describe the competency, that is formation, course, tributaries and termination of coronary sinus. So in this picture we can imagine that heart is having four quadrants. That is right atrium is supplied by small cardiac vein or drained by small cardiac vein. In a similar way, the right ventricle is drained by small cardiac vein. Left atrium is drained by vein of Marshall, and the left ventricle, which contains more of cardiac mass, it is drained by, anteriorly it is drained by great cardiac vein, and posteriorly it is drained by middle cardiac and inferior left. So coronary sinus is the largest vein of the heart. It is a wide channel. Its orifice has a fold of endocardial tissue called Tibicean valve. The Tibicean valve is the remnant of caudal portion of right valve of embryonic sinoatrial orifice. Formation of coronary sinus. It is situated in the diaphragmatic part of coronary sulcus. It is covered by muscle fibers of left atrium. It is dependent on the site of the drainage of posterolateral vein, which is shown in the picture. Coronary sinus is formed by the union of the great cardiac vein and the main posterolateral vein. Great cardiac vein runs along the interventricular groove, anterior interventricular groove. Veins of the heart. The great cardiac vein, also known as anterior interventricular vein, drains the anterior wall of the left ventricle and the interventricular septum. Other major tributaries entering the coronary sinus include inferior left ventricular vein and the middle cardiac vein that drain the posterior aspect of left ventricle. Then various atrial veins and the vein of Marshall drain left atrial myocardium into the coronary sinus. At the ostium of the right atrium, small cardiac vein drains right atrium and the posterior and posterolateral portions of the right ventricle. Then we go on to describe the competency, that is fibrous skeleton of heart. Heart is composed of cardiomyocytes supported by fibrocollagenous tissue. Fibrous tissue is condensed in certain areas to form a framework called fibrous skeleton. It anchors the valvular leaflets to the base of the ventricular mass. The majority of the fibrous tissue is concentrated at atrioventricular junctions, where the leaflets of mitral, aortic and tricuspid walls meet. Aside from anchoring leaflets to the ventricular mass, fibrous elements are essential for normal propagation of electrical conduction, since they insulate the atrial chambers from the ventricular mass, except from at the site of AV bundle. The beginning of fibrous skeleton. The term the heart skeleton was first used by an unknown French anatomist. It was later brought into prominence by Walmsley in 1929. The term was used subsequently to describe the fibrous tissue that provides anchorage for the valvar or valvular leaflets. Skeleton occupies, that is fibrous skeleton occupies the base of the ventricular mass. Only 3 of the 4 valvular orifices, that is the atrioventricular valves and the aortic, are in fibrous continuity. That is, mitral wall, tricuspid wall and aortic wall are in fibrous continuity. Other components that make the fibrous skeleton include areas of fibrous aortic mitral continuity, fibrous trigones, membranous septum of ventricle, interleaflet triangles as shown in the picture, and tendon of Coronary. Arrangement. 4 valvular orifices are not contained within the same plane. They are arranged in apical to basal direction. Tricuspid wall is the most apical, that is towards the heart apex, or most inferior are the 4 valves, followed by the mitral wall, then aortic wall, then pulmonary wall. Mitral wall is also the most posterior, while the pulmonary wall is the most anterior. Then we go on to study the position, arterial supply and conducting system of the heart. Conducting system. Conducting system of heart consists of cardiac muscle cells and the conductive fibers, but they are not nervous tissues. They are specialized for initiating impulses and conducting impulse rapidly through the heart. They initiate the normal cardiac cycle and coordinate the contraction of the cardiac chambers. Both atria contract together, as do the ventricles, but atrial contraction occurs first. The conducting system provides the heart its automatic rhythmic beat. Sinoatrial node, it is 10 to millimeters long, 2 to 3 millimeters wide and thick. It narrows towards the inferior vena cava. SA node is located less than 1 millimeter from the epicardial surface. It is in the sulcus terminalis at the junction of anteromedial aspect of the superior vena cava with the right atrium. Internodal and intra-atrial conduction. There are 3 intra-atrial pathways: anterior, middle and posterior internodal tracts. That first we start with anterior internodal pathway. So this begins at the anterior margin of SA node. It curves anteriorly round the superior vena cava to enter anterior interatrial band, also called as Bachmann bundle. This bundle continues into the left atrium. Anterior internodal pathway enters superior margin of AV node. Bachmann bundle is a large muscle bundle that conducts cardiac impulse preferentially from right atrium to the left atrium. Then we go to middle internodal tract, begins at the superior and posterior margin of SA node, travels behind superior vena cava to the crest of the interatrial septum, descends in the interatrial septum to the superior margin of AV node. Then we go to posterior internodal tract, starts from the posterior margin of SA node, travels posteriorly round the superior vena cava and along the crista terminalis to the eustachian ridge and then to interatrial septum above the coronal sinus, where it joins posterior portion of AV node. These groups of internodal tissue are referred to as internodal atrial myocardium, not tracts, as they do not appear to be histologically discrete specialized tracts. AV node. AV node is a superficial structure located just beneath the right atrium endocardium, anterior to the ostium of coronal sinus, above the insertion of septal leaflet of tricuspid valve, as shown in the picture. It is at the apex of the triangle formed by tricuspid annulus and the tendon of Coronary, as shown in the picture. The main function of AV node is modulation of atrial impulse transmission to the ventricles to coordinate atrial and ventricular contractions. Bundle of His. Bundle of His is a structure that connects the distal part of AV node. Then it perforates the central fibrous body, continues through annular fibrosis, that is the opening in the fibrous skeleton, where it is called non-branching portion as it penetrates the membranous septum. Bundle branches originate at the superior margin of muscular interventricular septum, immediately below the membranous septum. Cells of the left bundle branch cascadingly downward as a continuous sheet. So they descend into the left side. Right bundle branch continues intramyocardially as an unbranched extension of the AV bundle down the right side of interventricular septum to the apex of the right ventricle and base of anterior papillary muscle. Terminal Purkinje fibers connect the ends of the bundle branch to form an interweaving network on the endocardial surface of both ventricles, which transmit cardiac impulse almost simultaneously to the entire right and left ventricular endocardium. They penetrate only inner third of the endocardium. Purkinje fibers appear to be more resistant to ischemia than ordinary myocardial fibers. Blood supply. SA node artery is usually second branch of right coronary artery and supplies SA node in 55% of the cases. In the remaining 45%, SA node is supplied by branch of circumflex artery. Arterial supply of AV node in 90% of the hearts is from right coronary artery in the posterior atrioventricular sulcus at a point just beyond the origin of posterior intraventricular artery. In 10% of AV node is supplied by the terminal part of circumflex artery at the crux of the heart. AV nodal artery is associated with coronary dominance, where the vessel that gives rise to posterior descending artery also gives rise to AV node. Thank you.